You're listening to Unfiltered with Muhammad Uncut, a podcast about personal growth and authentic leadership. If you're looking for tips on how to manage others, get ahead, and make your way up the corporate ladder, this is not the show for you. This podcast is about being of service to others, leading from the heart, and evolving into a better version of yourself. Each episode brings you motivated stories about unfiltered leadership and authentic leaders, those who involve others, use their influence to amplify diverse perspectives, and inspire teams to achieve collective results. If this sounds like you, keep listening. Good afternoon and welcome to the Unfiltered Podcast, the podcast for leaders who involve others, use their influence to help them rise, and inspire them to become better versions of themselves. The Unfiltered Podcast showcases leaders who lead from the heart to make a positive change. And today we have such a leader. We have someone who has an unfiltered heart, who believes in diversity and in connection. And we're going to be talking with Brian Kelly. Good afternoon, Brian.
Good afternoon, Muhammad. Great to be with you.
Well, thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. So I'm looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have. But before we do, I just wanted to give people a bit of background. This is kind of the formal part of the podcast where I really make you look so good because you are so good. Like, you know, when I read your bio, I'm like, wow, this guy's for real. He's really down to earth, but he's also really got some great background to help create a solid approach to what you do on a daily basis. So with your permission, I'm just going to share with our listeners who Brian Kelly is. So
please,
Brian Kelly is an ICF Accredited Coach and Senior Consultant whose 3-year decade spans business, technology, finance, and human development. Brian is a visionary connector, community builder, and human development specialist who helps people and teams unleash their human greatness so they can create better together. Wow. Brian believes in each person's unique human greatness and the power of harnessing this to amplify impact for teams, communities, and organizations. Brian's encouraging energy and relational and strategic approach invite the inclusive business leaders and teams he works with to expand their perspective, shift their mindset, and step into their vulnerability to strengthen their belief and their ability to create better together. And you know, Brian, walking away from my intro about you, and it is a great intro about who you are, but when you say we're all about creating together, please, in your words, tell my listeners, who is Brian Kelly?
Thank you so much, Muhammad. So for me, it's about uplifting others, right? It's about connecting to the unique brilliance in each of us and unmuting that and unleashing that so that we can create better together. And it has to do with my story a little bit in terms of my workplace experience and the incongruence between how I felt in terms of this command and control industrial age environment and, well, this notion that people actually should matter and putting people first and putting humans first. And what if, when we put humans first, what would happen when we did that? And actually, it turns out, and there's data now to show that when we're not so myopically focused on the short term, we're focused on the long term, and we actually care about people and are okay with not only talking about it, but modeling that and creating the conditions for that to be the case in the business community, we create better together. And it's less about competition. Muhammad and I are going for the same position. I can't share what I know and you can't share what you know. But what if we brought the best of both of us together and created better in that sense? I talk about 1 + 1 is 11, that kind of thing, strategic interdependence.
Wow.
And that's what the excitement is for me around that, is bringing together people and the best of people. And I don't think we get that. I think we mute people by how we have the environments created right now, how they've been created, and the cultures in organizations. And what if that were different? What if that invited us to bring our best every day and not have any feelings of judgment or repercussions of doing that? What would be different?
And you know, that's what you do every day. You invite people to think about how things can be different. And in fact, from, you know, watching you since we met a few months ago on the Biz Catalyst Salon and from watching some of your videos, you inspire people to think differently. And I think when we can open our hearts and step inside and allow others to come and share that place of abundance as opposed to a place of scarcity, when we don't have to compete, but we can collaborate, when we can connect and we can grow together, you're right. We create spaces and places where we can be ourselves and we can be with each other. And even when we're virtual here, the idea is that there's a human connection that is more elemental than anything that we could try to, fake, because it's really about being authentic and it's really being about unfiltered, right? And that's what I love about your work and what I've learned about you and I'm about to learn and share with my listeners is you really want to remove those filters. You want to remove those veils so that you can get to the heart of the matter and tell people what you're really about. Can you tell me about your story? You say this is how you got here because of your story. Can you share go a little deeper?
Sure. So I worked in corporate until about 2013, and I really just kind of went through the motions. I did well at what I was doing, but really didn't have any guidance or direction there. And then eventually, as I kind of gravitated through my career, made some relationships, people saw something in me. They said, one of my friends, mentors, said, Brian, have you thought about going into coaching? And I hadn't thought about that as a profession. I'd done that through sports naturally, just kind of part of who I was. And it was in 2010 that this happened. Wasn't the first time someone had mentioned it. I was like, interesting. Maybe I should start paying attention to it. So along the way, people would mention things like that, but I wasn't ready to hear it. My friend Brian actually kind of, it was interesting. Through this mentoring program, I helped create called Rising Leaders, which is a sort of an internal ERG to try and develop younger leaders in the organization who hadn't yet got the opportunity to experience a role where they could play a leadership role and manage people. And so connected with him, and he's like, and he had been through Georgetown's program for leadership coaching and said, have you thought about this? You should think about that. I see this in you. And I was like, interesting. I could relate it back to my experience through sports and being a leader on the field, that kind of thing. And so I kind of looked at what was going on in my experience that kind of didn't allow me to kind of see myself and unleash the brilliance that I had. And so what happened was when I went on the coaching program, was going through that, and interesting, I went in with this, because I had talked to my friend and 4 other people have been through it, and they were kind of giving me like a lay of the land. You can expect to go through these triad sessions where you have to bring real issues. Like, okay, fine, I'll bring real issues, but I'm going to control what that is, right? I'll bring you real stuff, but how deep I go, I'm going to control the level of vulnerability. Fast forward, go through the process, struggling a little bit with connecting and applying the learning. And my learning circle advisor kind of called me out on that because she knew I was better. It's like, wait, hey, what's going on with you? Kind of jokingly and curiously. And so what was going on was something was getting in the way and I didn't know what it was. So I had to kind of do some deep exploration. Fast forward to after the second to last grouping of classes, I was going through this process of determining, hey, do I even want to get into coaching? Is this really important to me? Or is this just an idea I have that really sounds good at this time? And I knew I wanted to do it. And so I'm like, well, what's getting in the way? And I had to go through some personal deep dive, deep personal introspection. And what I realized and came to realize was I had an unhealthy relationship with vulnerability. My relationship with vulnerability was that vulnerability means weakness. It's just kind of what I kind of grew up believing. It stuck with me. Nothing deterred me from that up until then, that mindset of it. And it showed up in the choices I made or the lack of courage in certain situations and really being clear about how I wanted to contribute. And so go through this process, go back, and this is a story I tell often, is I go back for the beginning class of the next series of classes, which is the last series of classes, and 2 different classmates stopped me on the way to the classroom and said the exact same thing to me separately. They said, you look lighter. And they weren't talking about my weight. They could see a whole physical manifestation that changed in terms of how I showed up because I've gone through my process. And so when I say that what happened to me in the workplace, my experience in the workplace is I showed up in self-protective mode, right? Just trying to survive. And I find that a lot of folks do that, and I call it the work mask, right? We put on the work mask. It's the last piece of clothing, invisible clothing we put on before we go into the workplace. And that's sort of been a mission of mine. I talk about retiring the work mask. What if we could, and just created the conditions for people, teams, and businesses to flourish. And so what that did for me, going through my process, I got that external validation from my classmates, which was nice, but I didn't need it because now I was in congruence. They were seeing the me I wanted to show up, which had from time to time showed up in pockets, but not consistently. And so my relationship with vulnerability changed how I saw myself, which then allowed me to show up authentically when I'm working with leaders, inviting them into vulnerability so they can build connection and lead more effectively. And so that kind of led me down the track of professional development, team development, personal development, and helping people unmute themselves, whatever that means. We've suppressed ourselves in some form or fashion. What if we didn't do that? What if we put that energy of suppression towards unleashing the light that's within us, each of us, and then combining forces in a way that enabled us to create better together?
I want to, as you were talking and my mind was racing because I was getting excited and I was feeling that you're saying things that I've lived, that I know, but one word really is powerful for me here, and that's unmute. And the ability for us, I'm just going to stop there for a second, just going to say that word and then I'm going to pause. Unmute. In that silence is powerful and it's more powerful than words. But when we allow ourselves to unmute ourselves, and when we allow others to become unmuted, it's the power that we're giving and allowing and permitting and stepping back to allow to create inclusion, because we're helping to amplify those voices that have been muted. And you know, when you talk about diversity, and when I know that this is something we're going to get into, during the podcast and why it's so close to your heart. But when you started talking earlier about how people were telling you, hey, Brian, you should get into coaching. And it's like you couldn't see, you couldn't see beyond the veil. I talk about removing the mask, right? We've layered so many masks over us that we look in the mirror and we don't see them. And, it's like you're saying, we go to work and we've layered that last layer of, clothing, that last layer, that facade that the word that you use, if you can just remind me again.
I called it the work mask.
The work mask, right? And I know that, Brene Brown, when she's talking about vulnerability and the courage to be vulnerable, she talks about the armor. And you talk about how people looked at you and they said, Brian, you look lighter. That work mask, you've shredded it off, you've peeled the layers, but you've also taken the fear, the armor off you, and you showed up lighter. And we sometimes don't see that. Others can see it. And us, obviously, they can see when we've layered the armor on and we're burying ourselves. And sometimes we don't see it. In the same way that when we want to tear the armor off, others can see that we're going through that struggle, and maybe we're not able to. And so I'm fascinated by how people could see, not through you, but within you, that you had this special gift to give others and the coaching, and yet you needed to find that gift within you and the process that you went to accomplish or to address or embrace your vulnerability. And it's exactly what you're saying and what we all go through. We think that vulnerability is a weakness. And again, when Brene Brown talks about dare to lead, it's recognizing it as a courage. When I can say, this is where I need to grow. My weakness is only a weakness if it continues to be a weakness and I allow it to hold me back and pull me down and allow the armor to throw me in, down 20 feet into the water, and then I can't get up. But when I can recognize that self-awareness to say, I need to grow in this area. My weakness propels me to growth when I can be self-aware of it as a weakness. If I continue to be muted, I will continue to live in that weakness and in that moment of being weak. But when I become unmuted, I can recognize that my weakness is only an opportunity to grow. My failure or my defeat is only an opportunity to get back up and try again, and to see the light and to climb when one at a time, out of the cave and into the light, and to continue forging ahead. And it's not an event, it's an ongoing thing, right? And it's liberating. Like, I'm looking at you, I can see, I think you're agreeing with me, because it is liberating. Removing those masks, removing the workplace mask that most of us think we have to be one person at home and then another person in the workplace or in the community. It's a facade, it's a lie. And who's happy living a lie? So can you tell me about how liberating it was for you when you recognized that you had this gift and you started giving back?
So to your point, like putting up the facade, it's exhausting, right? It's like at many levels, right? Mentally, physically, and you all this energy to put up the facade. And so discovering coaching, and then as I'm going through this process, before I'm even getting into Georgetown, I'm meeting coaches, I'm getting to hear their language, how they interact with people. And so I'm like, that feels right. That feels right. I'm cool with going into it. And as I kind of see the gifts in myself, and again, I relate back to as a youth and even going up through high school and college, I always kind of just did this on the feeling like, you mean I can actually do this and help people through a career? Oh, awesome, right? I'm in. Like, let me kind of pursue this. And so that's sort of where my energy is about. What this did was help me see myself differently. I had to go through this, right? To see myself differently and see kind of how I was showing up, my relationship with vulnerability. What I say is I suppressed the best parts of myself for decades. Imagine that, right? Strategic thinking, relationship builder, being able to see the greatness in other people. And I wasn't, like you were saying, wasn't able to see it in myself. And oftentimes we can't, because the story tell ourselves that often are not grounded in truth, but story. And maybe they're not our stories, they're external stories. Stories that we hold that others may have told us. And what happens when we are able to realize what's going on and let go of the conditioning that's taken place and saying, wait a minute, I have a choice now. That doesn't serve me. I don't even believe it's true anymore. Maybe I never did, but I just kind of took it on because that's what adults were telling me. And of course, adults are smarter than me. And my influencers telling me this, I should be listening to them. And so not that they weren't trying to do their best, because everybody was doing the best from where they are, but it's interesting how as adults, we kind of carry with us what we learn. And one of the things I've learned is the most powerful learning we can do is unlearning. And that was the process that was going on for me, unlearning my relationship with vulnerability, reconnecting to the best parts of myself, being okay with what was good about me, what wasn't, and both are okay. And
what could be better?
It could be better, right?
Yeah,
Confident vulnerability.
Yeah,
it's like, none of us are perfect, right? I don't have to be perfect. I don't need to be right. I just need to bring my contribution and bring it with integrity. And what if we all did that? What would be different for us?
Well, I think we'd be living in better times. We'd be living in safer spaces. We'd be living in societies where more of us showed up and were heard and we felt our presence and we could be seen, and not with needing to take permission, right? When I see inclusion as a circle where the safest part of that circle is the inside, right? The smack in the center. And we create that circle of safety and we allow into that circle of safety whomever we choose, right? But if we're going to be truly inclusive, we have to recognize that those that are outside the circle, who need to be inside the circle, can't come in through our permission. We need to organically allow that circle to grow and expand so that others inherently and organically become part of that circle. And when you talk about adults and one thing that we've all gone through, one thing that we all have in common is the way we get into this world and the way that we leave. And we all came through this world through a primal scream, right? We all came in with that first cry and we weren't muted. I'm recognizing a trend here. We talk about being unfiltered, unmuted, and you just used another unword.
Unlearning.
Unlearning, right? And there's the trend here is that if we're going to become unfiltered, we need to learn to unmute ourselves and to unlearn some of the things that we've learned, whether we've learned them through bad experiences or I don't want to say lies. I like your terminology, the stories we've told ourselves. And there's a fine line between fiction and you look back to when you were, 6 years old. Did that really happen? Or was there a bit of fiction in your memory, right? And it's all subjective. And then you retell that story and over and over and over again. And all of a sudden that story isn't as authentic as what really happened. And I don't think we intend to lie, but the story morphs, right? But we came through this world, through that primal scream. We were allowed to be free. It was liberating. Mm-hmm. And children are liberated. They don't learn to hate. They don't learn to see differences as weaknesses or things that tear us down. They don't see, they see color as something to be proud of and to, as something to be colorblind and not colorblind. And they're okay with making mistakes. They're okay with saying the wrong thing and not necessarily letting that thing create a wall. In fact, I think when children make mistakes, and maybe even when they're hurtful to one another, they're creating relationships because they're recognizing the vulnerability. It's like when you put your hand on the stove and you burn yourself, right? Or it's like when you push somebody down and they fall and they cry, you recognize the cause and effect of what you've done. And therefore you recognize, well, I burnt myself. I'm not going to do that again. I pushed my friend down. She got hurt. I'm not going to do that again. That cause and effect teaches us, and we learn the right habits. But when we start learning the wrong habits and we form a habit of those horrible learnings, they become who we are, and we start putting on, to your point, the different masks, whether they're at work, whether they're at home, and they're no longer who we are. And so I completely agree with you. We have to unlearn, because we go through this process of continuously building the armor and putting armor and different masks on, right? We're no longer authentic, and I think, when you were saying that you couldn't see it in yourself, that you had this gift, it's because we have told ourselves so many stories. We don't know what our gift is anymore. We don't know what the true story is. And sometimes we need other people. Here's the thing. I think if I was going to put it out there and say that we need other people in order to write our other stories, people say to me, wait a minute, I can write my own story. But we don't live in an island. We don't live in a vacuum. We live with others. And as you say, when you think of leadership, you think of connection, you think of service and amplifying and contributing and making that impact, right? And that impact means for me to hear the sound of something happening, I need to relate it to something, right? If I don't know what that sound sounds like, I can't talk about it. I can't tell a story about it. And who would I be telling the story to if there wasn't another person that I was interacting with? And so I think allowing ourselves to be seen by others and allowing others to see our vulnerability is going to help us grow. How do you bring that into that capability to become the mirror for someone else, but to reflect the right image, not the counterfeit image? How do you use that in your work?
And so in my work, having been through my journey, I may not know exactly what your story is, but I've felt some of the same things. So it becomes a feeling thing. Hey, I've been through that struggle. And usually people are coming because they're struggling with something and they need some help with getting to the next step. And it's like, well, I can appreciate that. Oftentimes the lens through which people look through is a lens of scarcity, right? And this is what I don't have, because we've been conditioned in the workplace, right? Performance reviews. This is where you're terrible, Brian. You need to focus on this, and a little bit about what you're good at. But what if we focused on the strengths, right? And that's where I focus most of my work, is on people's strengths, understanding what their wiring is, right? How their unique wiring is, what lights them up, and how they can connect their strengths to contribution then. And also to needs. Hey, this is what I need, the conditions I need in order for me to bring my best contributions. And so that's how I do it, is connecting them to, and maybe reconnecting, because the story, in terms of my story, I would say that I did see it in myself growing up, but I suppressed it. Like I saw it and then it's like, oh, that's only like on the sports field, or that's only in this situation. It's like, but now I've got to go get a job and I've got to go do this, external expectations, right? And so a lot of times what it comes up to is you just get curious about what people's circumstances are, what they want to shift, what's important about that to them. And really, oftentimes it's about external expectations. And what about your expectations, right? Yes, you may have family or cultural traditions or things that lead to expectations for the job you'll have, the person you might marry, those things in your life that you would make choices on. Oftentimes neglecting how you feel about that and your input. And so I try and create scenarios, maybe for the first time for people about, hey, you know what, just indulge me here, right? It's your life, right? And the decision you make, whatever you make, is going to be fine with everybody you care about. And so if you want to do this, make this career change, or make this change in your life, everybody's going to be okay with it. What choice are you making, right? Paint a vision for the possible scenario that it can happen and there's no repercussions. Because I think oftentimes we don't take that next step that we'd want to take deep down in our heart because someone else wouldn't like it. And what if the whole someone else wouldn't like it is a fabrication, right? The subconscious brain doesn't decipher between true and false, it just absorbs, right? And so the stories we think are true and our subconscious mind has there, like you were alluding to before, Mohammed, it doesn't know truth and fact, but we start to develop kind of ingrained beliefs, right? And so our beliefs, our values, are all assumptions based on, oftentimes as we find out, either fallacies or things that we know no longer to be true. And so and it's that awakening, that awareness, and back to your point about awareness before, it all starts with self-awareness, right? Leadership starts with self-leadership. And so in order to be an effective leader, and vulnerability is part of that, right? So do I need to know everything, right? Command and control, you get dinged if you don't know stuff, right? And if you don't have all the answers. But what if there was a way to go about leading that was inclusive, that included other perspectives so that we can get to a better answer? And I didn't have to come up with it as a leader. We came up with it. And I didn't need to get the credit. You could have the credit. Or it wasn't even about credit. It was about best solution for the client. So inclusion. But diversity and inclusion becomes a practice and a way of being when we open up and we choose to invite in different perspectives. We choose to see people for who they are, not who we think they are, not how like me they are. And instead of, for the like me kind of leading to are they like me or not, is if they are, great, I'm going to get curious about their unique story. And if they're not, is how can I learn more about your culture, your background and experience, rather than kind of getting to that, oh, I'm not going to associate with you, I'm going to have a mindset about you that I've been conditioned to without any real reason or fact behind it. It just was like kind of a human conditioning thing. And so diversity and inclusion for me is about connecting. It's about inviting people in to hear perspectives and expanding your like me story. And so one of the things I did as I was starting off in this work was I wanted to volunteer. And where did I choose to volunteer? I volunteered in Latino community of leadership development and nonprofit there, and then in a Pan-Asian community. Why? Because I wanted to contribute and I wanted to learn firsthand what actually are some of the challenges, not read it on Google, because I can Google like some of the issues, but I wanted to feel the pain. I wanted to be in the trenches and understand, oh, that's where this community is looking to get more visibility, more access to opportunity, more access to promotions, more access to leadership. I don't believe it's ever been about capability to lead. It's never been about that. It's how we choose to see people based on stereotypes and boxes we may have put them in. And so my passion is around changing that, unmuting people, helping people see differently is what I basically say. And that doesn't mean getting you to think like I do, Mohammed. It's getting you to see differently than you currently do, that's more expansive, that helps you see different in terms of possibilities for people, possibilities for solutions and strategies, or even just different than you do now. And what does that open up for you? What does that invite you into?
It's those possibilities that allow us to be greater and bigger and maybe even better, right? And I often say that diversity is a fact, but inclusion is a choice. Around us, diversity it exists. It's not, we have no impact on diversity existing or not. It's out there, but we have every choice, as you can say, to lean in and to be curious and to make that decision about wanting to learn about the other. And we choose to practice inclusion, right? And what is fear but the absence of knowledge? What is fear but being in the midst of ignorance? Fear is really not knowing. Fear is not having the courage to step into the light and to clarify what you don't know. And what happens when we allow ourselves to be led by fear, we move into ignorance. Ignorance takes us further down the path of thinking it's us versus them. And all of a sudden we find ourselves down the path of hate. And this even happens on a micro, version within ourselves, right? And it's not just about our relationship with others, but when we live within fear of ourselves and the things that we believe in or don't believe in the right things, what we're doing is we're allowing ourselves to be led by ignorance. And again, I really think that the things that I'm afraid of, scary movies. I always say, I'm afraid of watching things like The Exorcist and Freddy Krueger, because I try to fall asleep and I'm thinking he's going to come and get me, okay? So that's 30 years ago, and I don't think that fear has gone away. I don't watch scary movies anymore. But I'm not afraid to try something. I'm not afraid of falling if you talk about being in sports. But what sports are you in, by the way, just out of curiosity?
I played soccer growing up. When I was younger, I played pretty much everything: baseball, basketball, hockey.
Yeah, you got me going when you were talking about that. I digress, but I think you bring that level of camaraderie and teamwork from your sports world to your community building and your coaching, right? And I hear that because you've referenced now your desire to help people on the field, but I think you bring that to the conversations. And again, I think when we are engaging in conversations with others, yes, I can Google something. Yes, I can read a book. It's like one of my contacts, I met somebody on LinkedIn. I believe it's Alexander Tace. And he wrote, after the George Floyd murder, he wrote that white people read a book after the death of a black person. Every time some every time some black person dies, a white person will go and create a book club. And I had to think about that, what he meant. And I without bringing a level of insult here. And what I was seeing in my workplace, what I was seeing everywhere is everyone wanted to become better educated around the issues. These issues didn't just happen. They have been around for hundreds of years. We've colonized and pillaged and taken people and treated them less than human. We treat some of our brothers and sisters of humanity worse than we would ever treat an animal. And I hope that no one is horrible in the treatment of animals either, right? But we do. And it's that fear and that ignorance and that lack of knowledge. But to his point, we need to do more than just education. We need to do more than just reading a book and learning and create a book club and say, what can we do? Let's have an opportunity where you can educate me around. But you know what? You need to make a choice. You need to move forward and be more intentional about leading your life differently. Not just reading or learning about it. You have to unlearn what you haven't learned as well, I think. Because becoming more inclusive means that you've got to go into those areas where you've got the Latinos trying to find out what it's like. And you have to feel maybe the unsafety that they do to recognize, the haves can only feel what it's like to have not when they have nothing. And privilege, the different layers of privilege, it's not just based on color. Mm-hmm. You and I are privileged because we have a home. Socioeconomic privilege, the privilege of being able to communicate through this technology. Many of the people whose voices we need to amplify because they've remained silent for so many years don't even have the platform to speak. So when we talk about unmuting, we really need to go further than just the action of educating ourselves or reading about how we can do things better. We need to get physical. We want to change homelessness. We need to go down into the streets and pick up that person who's sitting there, not just take him for lunch for that day, but make sure that he's got a shower, that he's got shelter, and that he has a better tomorrow. Otherwise, it's a Band-Aid solution. And, I can get really passionate about this and maybe even go off on my own tangent. But when you talk about diversity, when you talk about inclusion and going into, I take your background, you're a white male in the United States, right?
Yes.
It takes a lot of courage to recognize that you're also vulnerable, to walk into those circles where maybe you don't feel like you belong. But you're not going to create belonging unless you insert yourself into that circle where others exist and you haven't existed yet. You have to become part of their reality. I don't know, where does that land with you?
You reminded me of a story that wasn't very comfortable at the time, but it's a small micro story about what people that are not privileged or just are not white male might experience on a daily basis. The Latino nonprofit I was working with or a part of, they had their national convention in Las Vegas. This is 2011. And I'm going there with a contingent from DC and then all other pieces of the, all of the chapters of the Alpha, it's called, joined in Vegas. And there's maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people there. And I got there, and this is a different version of Brian at this point, hadn't been through coaching, hadn't gone through some transformation. And I got there and everybody's like speaking Spanish and focusing on what we're going to eat. We're going to have this kind of food and stuff. And it was an awakening for me, right? It didn't feel good, but nobody was intentionally doing anything to me. It was how I was experiencing. I'm like, and as I took some time to reflect, I was like, that's like what most other people that are marginalized communities, they experience that every day. And that's just like one weekend, right? It's like, but it was enough for me to say, well, wait a minute. And I was where I was. So, I mean, but now it's like, okay, diversity and inclusion's always mattered to me, but it takes the matter to me from an education standpoint, and immersing myself in these communities was part of my education, also contribution. And this whole notion that human is like, there's one human race, right? And all the sameness of us, I look at the sameness of us, not that we've all had the common humanity as, let's start with what's great about us all and what's common about us all, the experiences, right? You have children, you go through a similar process, right? And no matter what culture you come from, you go through a schooling process, there's a similar process in terms of stage of life events, those kind of things. You get married, maybe there's different traditions and different cultures, but you go through a similar thing. And in order to get past difference or look at difference differently, what if we started with what's the same about us and what's, and the human aspect of it? And that's where I start to look, right? And it's the notion for how do we change this? And it comes back to what my experience was in the corporate world with the industrialized command and control. It's the difference between power over and power with. And
completely. At the height of the Cold War, we were wondering if, the Russians loved their children too, right? And we needed Sting to make a song about that. But, you play that song today, it probably just sounds like a great melody, but you played it back in, what was it, the 80s, I think, right? And it made you wonder, like, wow, yeah, the Russians, right? Now, we don't think like that, but there are a lot of Russians today, right? Like here in our backyards, in our school systems, and in our communities, there are a lot of others, and we've othered so many people. I live in Canada, and I'm fortunate in that multiculturalism is celebrated here. But that doesn't mean there isn't racism. There's racism more than I even want to start thinking about it, right? But it's similar to what you are saying, let's find those commonalities. Let's find the common ground that we can plant the seeds and find some stability for both of us to stand firmly upon and find that land and that safe space together. And then when we realize that we approach things differently, start a conversation. Use our differences to bolster our, the things that we don't have in common, and to allow us to grow and to learn. And, innovation and creativity, they come from differences. So in a workplace, when you invite others to weigh in and you let them, speak up and you amplify their voices, they will buy in and they will come up with ideas and they will help you build innovation, right? That some of the best companies were built not from top down, but from down up. Servant leadership is you turn the triangle over and you allow the leaders to serve others and to allow them to be heard because they've got great ideas. And I think workplaces where they open up the opportunities to listen to others and to hear them and to invite their input. That's where creativity thrives. We just don't do enough of that, right? So I think, people say, oh, I'm not racist. I don't see that black person as black. I'm colorblind. I say, hell no. I want to be seen as black if I'm black. I want to be seen as a minority. I want to be seen as a Muslim. I want to be seen as white. I want to be seen as, Jewish, whatever I believe in. Celebrate me. Celebrate who I am. Don't be afraid to celebrate me and to celebrate that I am different than you. A beautiful garden doesn't just have roses, and it doesn't just have red roses. A beautiful garden has a diversity of fauna and flora, and it invites, some places, some gardens have their own biosphere because of the diversity, and they allow growth because that's the way it should be. Mm-hmm. But to go to what you were saying earlier, we've learned to do things in a way that we've muted out creativity. We've silenced our ability to let others speak. And all of a sudden, everything is on monochrome. And that's scary, right? And we will look what's happening right now. And, it's just south of us. And, I'm in Canada, you're in the States. So I'm going to say south of the border, right? It's scary what's happening because the ignorance is not allowing us to recognize that we're in the midst of a pandemic. And we need to be very aware and careful. And, our borders are still closed because we're approaching our response to this pandemic very differently. And unfortunately, people are getting hurt. But I think what we can take away from this pandemic is that we may come from many different backgrounds, but we form one nation, and that's the human race, humankind. And we are all impacted by the COVID virus in the same way. We most of us hopefully don't get it, but those who do, the virus doesn't discriminate against you as a human. It impacts you. But we discriminate against each other. And I think it's through that fear and ignorance and not wanting to step out and take off that armor or take off the mask. So, let me ask you, you've done a lot of reading and a lot of learning. What is one of your favorite books, a book that has really had an impact on the way that you lead?
So, Believership, from my friend Mike Vacanti.
Believership?
Believership, yeah.
Yeah, I've not heard of that. Okay, I'm going to look.
Believership, the superpower beyond leadership. And so Mike goes into sort of like the way things have been, and they're no longer desirable or sustainable, right? And so we all kind of cognitively know this, but maybe we don't take action. Maybe we don't have the courage to step into a leadership role and kind of create this environment where we can all bring ourselves and be ourselves and share our voices. And it won't really change until we change how we think about failure, change how we think about difference, put our priorities in order in terms of the pandemic you're talking about. There's different responses from all over the world where it's going well, human life, safety first, those kind of actions are kind of easy to see. Where it's other motivated in terms of political, financial, whatever the motivations might be there, you can see it not going very well. And same thing sort of in terms of, as we look at leadership going forward, this is an inflection point. We have an ability to kind of shift the direction of leadership and what it means and make it more we-centric, human-centric.
Why do you think that? Why do you think we and now? What's different? Or did everybody always say this?
Well, look what the pandemic's teaching us, right? There's so much learning there. What is the invitation, right? Look at how nature's rebounding because everything is being shut down, right? Look at the pause opportunity for many people now to kind of pause and reflect on their life, their career, where they are, what's working, what's not, and the invitation that might be to step into their courage differently or take a course in something that's totally different that they would want to do. The opportunity's always sort of been there, right? But for whatever reason, we just got caught up in the routine of life. And this disruption is actually an invitation if we choose to look at it that way.
Love it. Love it.
And so that's really, I talk about invitations a lot because we invite, in terms of diversity, it's inviting people into it. And I'm doing something like that right now with a community that I'm a part of, in terms of, we want to get different voices that have not yet been heard in there. And I've connected with someone in, that's in the student body president of their school, and they're having a lot of success in terms of being the first of their demographic to be in that role, and doing a lot of good there. And this person was also recognized and did an op-ed in Time on their sort of family experience. And so I was thinking, well, we do this series that kind of brings people together for a diverse conversations called Truly Human Conversations, HUE, bringing in a spectrum of people so we can get different perspectives. I'm thinking, no, one of the voices we don't have yet is this demographic, the young demographic.
Right.
And so what if we got invited them, and if they want to play, they want to play. If they don't, the different people we invite in. And so we're on the path to doing that now too. And what other voices aren't represented or fully represented? So we talk about like expanding a community. Expanding to a community that's just a larger number isn't the goal. Expanding to people that are not yet represented and have their voice included, so we can better understand one another at a different level. And then as we go forward and take action, we do it with greater purpose, intention, and impact. That's where the value proposition is.
And that is so incredibly powerful. You know, when you talk about disruption, the entire earth was disrupted. And it's as if the greater force, whatever you believe that is, Mother Nature, God, nature, the universe, whatever you want to call it, some greater force said, enough. You've hurt me, and I need to heal. And every human being on the face of the earth received the similar message, and we stopped. It is as if all time zones merged into one, and time stood still. And we stopped our economies, we stopped our work, we stopped our families, we stopped everything. We stopped, I don't want to say dead in our tracks, but we've froze in our space, and we recognized how insignificant we are. But that disruption, to your point, was an invitation. It was an invitation to step into something more courageous. It's really an acknowledgement of the vulnerability, but the negative vulnerability that I think we pushed the earth into, and ourselves, and our lack of awareness with each other, and our need to come from that place of scarcity, to be better than you, to be better than them, right? We kept going down that path where it was all about profit, not people. And we needed to show that it was us over them. And that disruption caused us to pause, to reflect, to reset, and restart, but hopefully to recover in a way that we can be more inclusive. And so when I asked you, it's not that I disbelieved you, it's because I think if we don't recognize now, 2020 is, I mean, when you look at what 2020 means, I think, my goodness, like 2020 can sit on its own paradigm, right? It could, 20 over 20, it's one. During 2020, we became one. I just got goosebumps, okay? I'm horrible in math, but I just did fractions, yay! 2020, 20 over 20, we became one. And the power of one is what we're trying to do. And we have this opportunity now to become one. I'm going to use that later this week in a video I'll do.
I love that.
Right? But we've never seen it. And we've stepped forward and recognized the power of needing to work together as one community, one human race, one group of people who had one common vision. And I think this is a time when we just step out of fear and step into the light, and don't go back. We don't want to go back to the old normal. We don't want to build a fake normal based on precepts that got us to where we are. We need to build a better, more inclusive, a thriving community where we all belong. And it's not finger pointing. It's not a black person looking at a white person saying, you did this to me. And it's not a Muslim looking at a Christian saying, you did this to me. We need to stop blame, but we need to acknowledge accountability as well. Because I don't think it's enough to move forward if we don't realize that the actions that we've all taken, those before us and together now have led us to where we are. And if we don't take a different kind of action, we will continue to suppress and oppress communities and nations and people. So, you're leading me down this path where now I don't want to stop because it's my passion as well. But I want to come back and ask you, because we're coming up to the top of the hour, and this is where I ask my dear guests, what is one thing that you can share with my listeners to help them become better leaders, better persons, better humans? And I call this the thought of the week. So the unfiltered thought of the week. So what is one thing that you could share from your experience and your passion to help others become better humans?
So for me, it's looking inward for the answers you seek, right? And so we tend to be looking, school teaches us, look out external for the answers, learn your answers, regurgitate them back out, but get curious about and in tune with your awareness on multiple dimensions, spiritual, physical, and otherwise. Look inward for the answers. Get curious about, why do I believe what I believe? Because leadership ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, it starts with self-leadership, and that starts with awareness. And it's like, oh, I have this belief that I'm better than X, or this group should be the in group, this should be the out group, this binary in and out, us and them. What if we came to we by starting with looking in and saying, do I really believe that? And maybe rather than going down the rabbit hole of how did I get to this belief, just acknowledge that you do have it and ask yourself, is that what you want to carry forward? Because we're always in choice, right? And so from this learning, unlearning, learning anew, right? Ask yourself, do like a check of, hey, do I really believe X? If I do, okay. And if I don't, okay, well, what is it that I want to carry forward to become better myself, to create better with and for others, and to amplify impact so that we can have a shared humanity that is inclusive, that is respectful, and that is one global human community, that no matter what flavor of human you are, we respect the humanity that you do have and invite you to contribute your perspective, because there's no bad perspective, there's just a unique perspective. There's no, and then to look at failure differently. That's the other invitation is, we're talking about innovation and creativity. How do you get there if failure is not a part of the equation? So this notion that we all might have a failure and being conditioned to have to get it right the first time, and, oh, I failed, they won, I lost. What did you learn from something that didn't go the way that you wanted it to, that can help you next time become better? Focus on better, not win, lose, right, wrong. What does better look like?
Love that. Focus on better, not win, lose. And we're in this together. And if we're both win, as Stephen Covey says, it's a win-win situation. And it's about our synergies. It's about how can we continuously improve, but we do that together. And, one of the takeaways from our conversation is we do that by leaning in, by being curious. Because when we lean in and we're curious, we say to the fear, you no longer lead me. I'm leaning into the light. I'm being curious about what I can learn and unlearn, and I'm going to become better. And you've really helped me learn a new perspective today. So I thank you for being not just my guest, but a brother. We're brothers in humanity. I want to thank you for sharing the same passions that I do, and for helping to spread that message to the people that you work with and to the people who will hopefully listen to this podcast. And if you do listen to this podcast, give us a shout out, because we're all about you. We're about being in this together. So stay blessed, stay unfiltered, and keep your message strong. And all the best to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you for listening to Unfiltered, the show about authentic leadership and personal growth. Like what you heard? Click subscribe, share it, and tell a friend about it. And don't forget to leave a rating.